Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seatbelts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, because there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, what is one thing that we have all noticed with respect to this 2016 presidential election cycle thus far? We know that the salivating mainstream media has lamented about the down and dirty nature of the 2016 race. And there can be no question about it. This has been one of the most heated and contentious presidential campaigns and battles of living memory. Of course, as I've stated on previous episodes of the Wright Flyer, this is not something new with respect to the arena of American politics. It has been with us since the inception of our country, and I am going to be delving a little bit deeper into that as the show goes on. But it's important to take into consideration what the media has done and the significant role that it has played with respect to this contentious fight thus far. We have seen time and again that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media have been willing to go out of their way to give special treatment to New York businessman, billionaire, and real estate tycoon Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus. They have given him, as Jeremy and I pointed out on yesterday's episode, more than 3 times the coverage of the other candidates vying for the highest office in the land. This sort of lopsided coverage clearly indicates that there is a bias with respect to the salivating mainstream media. But what is the purpose behind it? What is it that they are seeking to promote with this lopsided coverage? Well, again, this is theoretically speaking, but I have reason to believe that it is a very sound theory. And that is this: the salivating mainstream media, as we are all aware, is basically tapping down on and promoting this Fabian socialist message. We've seen it for generations. After all, if you think back to Walter Cronkite, Roger Mudd, and Mike Wallace, and the way that they covered the Vietnam War, it was all designed to lead the United States of America to defeat in that conflict. Although we never did really lose on the battlefield, we lost on the home front, and that was a battle that was waged by the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. And again, it just goes to show that we are in the midst of a major fight here. And it's a fight that shows no signs of changing or letting up or, relenting. And the reason for that is that the salivating mainstream media absolutely thinks that they can promote this sort of hostile environment, that the American people will be none the wiser to their chicanery and shenanigans. But you see, just like any group that has stood in stark opposition to the will of the popular sovereigns of this great republic, they have underestimated the will of the people. And with the advent of social media, which, as I've stated on previous episodes of the Wright Flyer, is absolutely a double-edged sword, the voice of the people is now able to be heard. It means that the people are capable of taking the stance that they need to in order to find the truth. And that's what they're about. That's what they're looking to do. And I believe this is crucial, absolutely crucial and critical in moving to understand why things have developed the way that they have and what this means with respect to everything that matters, particularly when you speak to the state of the race and the way that things are occurring right now. Everywhere we turn, the salivating mainstream media goes out of its way to promote a certain perspective, and only that perspective. They think that the American people are not paying attention. And they think this unequivocally for the reason that they, for the longest amount of time, have been absolutely capable of controlling what is disseminated, the sort of information that the American people have access to, and therefore they think that they can control the narrative of what matters in this country. And we see that with the way that they have treated Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus with kid gloves, it speaks volumes about what they're doing. And you see, they still want to control the narrative. Once they've had that taste of power, which they've had for well over a century now, there is no way that they are going to willingly try and surrender the narrative. In that sense, I think we could, with complete concrete certainty, say that this old age media, the general media, is kind of a dying art. And it's not even an art. Let's say it's a dying form of deception, because the rise of social media means that the people now have ways to vet information for themselves, and the internet means that there is more information at the disposal of the popular sovereigns at real-time breakneck speeds that has never been achievable before. In fact, it wasn't even imaginable, say, 30 years ago or 25 years ago. The internet was starting to develop at that time, but it really hadn't taken off with the sort of media juggernaut that it has become today. And that's fascinating to me because it clearly changes the dynamics of how the entire American political arena works. It means that the people are once again entrusted with certain power that they lacked in generations and decades and, yes, even centuries past. And I know that I've spoken in regards to this for some time now, and on past episodes of the Wright Flyer, but it bears repeating because it explains a little bit of the different nature of this campaign and election cycle. What we could really say is the method in which Donaldus utilizes Twitter, which is absolutely a part of the social media apparatus, he has changed the dynamics of campaigning. He's changed conventional wisdom. And maybe that is a direct result of the changing nature of rapidly expanding and improving technology. But we've seen that Twitter has been a part of campaigns for some time now. It's just that he is a popular culture icon, for lack of a better term, or lack of a better descriptor. He fits into this paragon of, or rather paradigm of modern, instant connected, constantly connected media. And he uses it to garner attention and to garner free media coverage. And the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media have been totally in line with this. They have just marched lockstep with the tune that he has played. In fact, that's where I conjured up this image that Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus is the Pied Piper for disillusioned conservatives, and to a lesser extent, disillusioned leftists and Fabian socialists. Because when you look at his career thus far, not just his business career, but the popular image that he has forged for himself in the eyes of both the mainstay media or establishment media and new media, it's been, for the most part, a progressive type view. He has embraced all of the Fabian socialist positions that should make any true die-in-the-wool conservative recoil in horror. Because, take for instance his stance with Planned Parenthood. He says they do many great things, and in the past he said that he was completely for the abortion movement, or completely pro-choice in every sense of the word, despite having personal reservations and personal dislike and distaste for the practice of abortion. And you see, what it comes down to is he tries to claim that he's not a politician, but he sure plays the media like an expert politician. He speaks out of both sides of his mouth. He's been on either side of every major political issue, and the salivating mainstream media, at least thus far, has given him a free pass on that. Now, why would they do that? Now, I know I'm reiterating a point that both Jeremy and I made on yesterday's program, but I'm going to repeat it here. It's that the media is sitting on a bunch of bombshells with respect to Trump. And that's something that Texas Senator Ted Cruz has alluded to in some of his exchanges with the media. And they're sitting on it because right now they are totally hoping that they can promote Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus as the inevitable nominee for the gutless opposition party, or GOP. Now, why would they do that? Again, it centers around this notion of something that Rush Limbaugh had pushed during the 2008 election cycle. I believe that he referred to it as Operation Chaos. This is where he instructed conservatives to cross over during the primary season and vote for then presidential candidate Barack Hussein Obama. The reason for doing so, he hypothesized, was to ensure that the least electable Democrat clinched the nomination. The problem was that Barack Hussein Obama espoused the view of the Fabian socialist wing of the Democrat Party, which has been taking it over in unabashed fashion. It's as though there has been a coup within the ranks of the Democrat Party. The old yellow dog, blue dog, and moderate Democrats, someone like Senator Webb or Zell Miller, they have basically been pushed out of their party by the radical frothing at the mouth Fabian socialists, who are diametrically opposed to the supreme law of the land, which is, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2 of our shared Constitution, the United States Constitution itself. And you see this with the two candidates that are vying for the Democrat Party's nomination, that of Hillary Rotten Clinton and Vermont Senator Noid-Face Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders has repeated the same thing that Obama stated at the height of his first run for the highest office in the land. Recall that Barack Hussein Obama said to rapturous applause that we're 5 minutes from changing or fundamentally transforming the United States of America. Now, what does that mean? Well, we now know, after two disastrous, monstrous terms of this Barack Hussein Obama regime, exactly what he meant when he stated that he was going to fundamentally transform the United States of America. It was to take us away from being a representative republic based on the will of the popular sovereigns, we the people, and to replace it with this oligarchical Fabian socialist type of feudalist system. Because if you recall, Alexander de Tocqueville stated so long ago that socialists, due to their innate desire to micromanage the daily facets of our lives, are the quintessential reflection of New Age feudalists. They think they are going to be a bureaucratic form of nobility that tells the great unwashed Hun, we the people, how to vote. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. And I say that it's insane because we know that feudalism does not work in a modern style of society. Just look at the way that our economy is now. Feudalism worked on the notion of mercantilism. That was the developing economic mindset of the medieval era straight through to the Renaissance period, where we still had remnants of feudalism. In fact, feudalism didn't fully, truly die off until the 20th century, Russia being one of the last autocratic feudalist states left. And what's so important about mercantilism is that at its core, it teaches that capital is finite. Now, capitalism states that people can create capital. It requires there to be popular sovereigns, and the popular sovereigns are able to create based off of their skills and their natural talents. That's the natural order of things. That is the way that a society is meant to work, and that is what allowed a flourishing middle class to exist. Capitalism has created untold amounts of wealth, but you don't hear that from the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, at least not for the most part. But now, getting back to this notion of the 2016 presidential election cycle being among the most contentious, arguably the most contentious presidential contest in living memory, we have to laugh at what the media says. They act as though they've played no role in promoting the juvenile nature of the tone of the race. Now, how can that be? Because as Jeremy and I both pointed out on yesterday evening's program, there can be no doubt that they have given Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus the unprecedented amount of time that they have, 3 times more than any of his opponents vying for the highest office in the land. Therefore, there can be no doubt when we say that the salivating mainstream media has been the principal and primary orchestrator and driver of the tone and message of this election cycle. Now, it's interesting to note that on yesterday's O'Reilly Factor, Charles Krauthammer appeared on the show, and he tried to state that the candidates dictate the media's tone and coverage with respect to the presidential race. Now, I find this very hard to believe, because when you look at the past election cycles and the institution that is the very definition of the salivating mainstream media, you see that there is this unquestionable, unyielding, unavoidable bias on the part of the media. They're propping up a Fabian socialist agenda and message, and they have been since basically the time of William Randolph Hearst and the creation and establishment of yellow journalism. Sensationalism is what drives the media and has driven it for at least 128 years now. Because if you go back to the Spanish-American War, it was false media hype and false media narratives that plunged the United States of America into what would become known as the Spanish-American War over the little island just 90 miles south of Cuba, just 90 miles south of Florida, Cuba. We fought over that. We sought their independence, but the stories of a lot of the atrocities that fanned the flames of anger and even encouraged the United States to place the battleship Maine in harbor at Cuba they were grossly exaggerated by William Randolph Hearst, who truly, completely, domineeringly wanted to control and spin the narrative. That is what the media has been about ever since. And what makes them so dangerous about it is the tone that they place upon themselves. They come out and claim that they are the paragons of virtue and objectivity. But there is nothing objective about the manner in which the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media have been covering news stories. And there can be no question about this going back for generations. So what Charles Krauthammer was saying there just does not actually connect with reality. The dots are missing there. And that is part of the reason why the salivating mainstream media has been struggling with honesty, has been struggling with public perception of what they are and what they're pushing for. So it makes me have to laugh a little bit when you look at what they're trying to say is happening with respects to this race. And again, they tamp down on this erroneous belief and this erroneous contention that this race has been unprecedented. Certainly, parts of this race are unprecedented, but the United States is no stranger to contentious elections. Recall that I've stated on past episodes of the Wright Flyer that the election of 1800 was so contentious that even in that time it was called the Revolution of 1800. People were going out into the streets and were literally brawling over the contentious nature of the election. Now, if what is been reported is true with respect to that Kyle Odin creature who shot that pastor in the head and 6 times in the back, who was a member of that pastor's congregation in Idaho and is alleged, or at least it has been speculated, that he is a follower and supporter of Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus, then we could say that perhaps this election is devolving into as contentious and heated a contest as that of 1800. I certainly hope not, because that would speak greatly as to the moral decay in this country. Now, there's no denying that with the manner in which moral relativism has sunk its claws into the body politique of the United States of America, that we are truly witnessing a near complete moral decay and rot in this country. But with that said, I do not believe that it is irreparable or incapable of being reversed. But it is going to take a protracted and deliberate effort on the part of we the people, the ultimate wielders of sovereignty in this great representative republic of ours, to stem the tide and to change the course of this nation. And when you stop and think about it, that is what our founding fathers would have expected of us. Remember that Benjamin Franklin said, "We have handed you a republic if you can keep it." Now, it's the latter part of that quote, which is attributed to that great and noble founding father of ours, that sticks out. It says, if you can keep it. That places the onus of responsibility squarely on the shoulders of the popular sovereigns. That means it is our outright duty and obligation to do everything in our power to ensure that the republic remains viable and that we do not allow it to fall into chaos and into disarray and disrepair. Unfortunately, we have seen that the Fabian socialists, who absolutely have developed their entire iconography on the wolf in sheep's clothing narrative, which is based off of one of Aesop's fables, is to incrementally intrude upon and invade our institutions of education, thereby indoctrinating the up-and-coming generations, and indeed those generations that have yet to be born. And they have also infiltrated our information media outlets. Again, I point back to the magnus opus of that great visionary, Zygmunt Dobbs, who wrote in Keynes and Harvard way back in the 1950s and 60s that the concerted efforts of the Fabian socialists were to dominate these pillars of society in order to infect it with the disease that is socialism. And I think that's a very apt description of exactly what socialism is. It acts like a virus. And you can see this anywhere that has even flirted with the notion of adopting a socialist political economic system has become very hostile to what existed before. And you see it with the Cultural Revolution in China, where Chairman Mao Zedong of the Chinese Communist Party, as part of his iron rice bowl philosophy, engaged in what is so deceptively named the Cultural Revolution. You know, on the surface, it goes to this semantics that the left are complete masters of playing, this radical and twisted games. Cultural revolution, that sounds great, doesn't it? Sounds like the culture is moving forward, progressing towards something great. But no, it wasn't. It was marching towards the same moronic tenets and destructive tenets of communism, Marxism, and socialism that have been seen time and again everywhere it has been attempted. And you notice that none of the communist countries, or the so-called communist countries, ever really embraced fully communism and didn't stay on that economic model. The reason being is that a command economy like that, where everything is centralized and all orders come from the top down, that just is not a viable system. It is unsustainable. And that is why you see a sort of odd hybrid economy pop up. But the problem is it still denies individual sovereigns their human dignity, their human ingenuity, their individual skills, trades, gifts, natural-born talents that have been endowed to them by their creator, and it is an anathema to the natural law. But when you look at the structure of the United States of America, you see that we are unquestionably founded on the core principle of the natural law. It underpins the very foundation of this representative republic. But going back to what the Fabian socialists have done by infiltrating both our information media outlets and sources and our institutions of education, they have convinced people that all of a sudden the United States of America is a direct democracy, when in fact nothing further could be so. Nothing could be further from the truth, because the United States, by its very foundational document, that great social compact penned by the hands of men, yet divinely inspired by Providence itself, states that we are a republic. And what's the difference between a republic and a direct democracy? Well, a direct democracy only respects the rights of the majority, whereas a representative republic completely respects the rights of the individual sovereigns. It does not seek to create a tyranny of the majority. And again, I turn to the prophetic words of founding father Benjamin Franklin, when he made that little alliteration as to exactly what a democracy is and why the Founding Fathers were diametrically opposed to it, and indeed why the United States of America must never be a democracy. He compared democracy to two wolves and one lamb voting for what's for dinner. Now, it's humorous on the surface, but there is a dark meaning behind that. It means that a tyranny of the majority could completely control and dominate the political apparatus of the country and move it away from its foundational roots. And we see that that is exactly what the Fabian socialists, through their chicanery, are attempting to do to this republic. You hear it all the time with the loose way that the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, and indeed the various teachers and professors in our institutions of education from coast to coast and border to border, loosely flaunt and throw out this diatribe that the United States of America is a democracy. Well, we're not. We're not. Now, going back to what Charles Krauthammer had said, Jeremy and I have shown that this claim that the candidates dictate the way that the media will cover something and the message that is covered. And what Charles was trying to hint at was the refusal to attack Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus at the opening stages of the race is what has dictated this now sudden deluge of attacks by the media against Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus. It's just not true. Jeremy and I have shown it because the media truly does promote a Fabian socialist agenda, and that is undeniable. You see it everywhere with respect to the mannerisms in which they go forth and spew their nonsense, and the way they try and control the narrative. And they do try and control the narrative because it's all about what message they wish to convey. And that message has been extremely hostile to true constitutionalists, those of us who want to preserve our representative republic based on the natural law tenets, based on our fundamental and unalienable rights that were endowed to us by our Creator. That now, at least according to the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, is extremist. Since when has wanting to abide by the law and have the law apply, because the United States of America is a nation of laws, not of men, meaning that equal protection of the law truly and unequivocally applies to all people, irrespective of their station in life or in their status or what office they might hold. Now, that narrative and that absolute truth with respect to the United States has been all but lost due to the way that the media has handled current events for generations. And it has been a concerted effort on their part. All you have to do is look at the bizarre rantings and ravings of people like little Chrissy Tingles Matthews on PMS-NBC and the various other radical Fabian socialist leftists in the media. Now, for a time there, those of us with right-leaning philosophies and views thought that we had a reprieve with Fox News. But isn't it funny that we now see that myth has been dispelled? And if there is one thing that we can congratulate Donaldus on, it's showing that he has bought Fox News. You see, I think it laughable when people say that the reason that they support the Donaldus is because he is not a politician. That's just a joke, and it's a bad joke at that. He has been greasing the palm of politicians, enabling the very corruption that the people are so outraged about for 3 decades at least. And the people don't see it. The reason they don't see it, and this is not to disparage them, this is just to state an observation. I only call things as I see them, but the reason for this is just that he has tapped into this wave of anger, this wave of outrage that is truly gripping the hearts of the popular sovereigns right now due to the incessant lies that have been thrown out by, yes, the so-called establishment wing of the gutless opposition party. I prefer to call it the detente wing because they want to live and let live with the Fabian socialists who are out to destroy this country. It's really down to a question with respect to the so-called establishments of both parties to tempo and timing. How fast can we move to so-called fundamentally transform the United States, replacing the will of the popular sovereigns with the undeniably disastrous doctrine of socialism? That is their agenda. That is what they have been doing for generations now. And you watch, every time that it comes to a head or a battle like this, where the very soul of the nation hangs in the balance, we always steadily, incrementally move further and further to the left. It's to the point now that the gutless opposition party is nothing short of the Me Too party. I too want to go along with the Fabian socialist bandwagon, this new revolution, dare I say, cultural revolution that is occurring in this country. And when you look at things like the Obergefell decision by the Supreme Court allowing gay marriage, you see that our values, our traditions, and our institutions are under assault. And then when you look at the two-faced propositions of souls like Benedict Arnold Paul Ryan and his initial stance of, we're going to create a balanced budget, we have to stand up to the Barack Hussein Obama regime, to when, after securing his new position as Speaker of the House of Representatives, he gave Obama carte blanche to do whatever he wanted with that omnibus bill, which included funding his executive amnesty, which included continuing to double down on these various unconstitutional agencies like the Bureau of Land Manipulation and Malarkey, and the EPA's attempts to strangle the life out of America's energy industry. That truly does raise the ire of the people. And it makes the atmosphere ripe for a candidate like Donaldus, Julius Caesar Trumpus on the right, and to a lesser extent, the Noid-faced boy me Santos on the left. I think we can say without a doubt that there is a consolidated movement in this country right now, and that this movement is undeniably based on the outrage that the American people on either side of the political aisle feel. But part of what is also driving this ire is the great division that exists amongst the American populace. We have not been as divided as we currently are today since 1860. That's right, folks, since the lead up to the American Civil War. That should give us reason for pause and concern, because it undeniably speaks to a strain that exists within this country. The Fabian socialists have successfully obfuscated the truth to such a point now that the greater good for the country no longer exists on one side. And the other side has become the lapdog, me too, me too, me too, almost a cartoon caricature of what an opposition party must be. And that is why we have named them here on the Wright Flyer the Gutless Opposition Party, because there is nothing grand nor old about what the party has done. They have shown themselves for the poltroons that they really are, and therefore have rightfully earned the contempt of the American people. The problem that we have is that with the narrative of the salivating mainstream media and the bombastic and abrasive mannerisms of Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus, a true constitutional conservative who believes the same way that those of us who want the Constitution to be restored to its rightful place believe. They've labeled him as a liar. They've gone along and refused to connect the dots with respect to the innumerable lies spewed by the New York businessman, billionaire, and real estate tycoon. That has been enabled by the bias of the salivating mainstream media, and that is the point that Charles Krauthammer misses. Yet I have to take this a step further. Bill O'Reilly claims that the juvenile aspect of it gets media coverage not because the media is trying to spin this in a narrative to promote the weakest candidate, who all of the most recent poll shows cannot, in head-on contests with either Hillary Clinton or Noid-Face Boyne Me Sanders, win. He can't. Why? Because his negatives are the highest ever since we have started recording that. And anyone who even remotely approaches the levels of negatives that are polling against the Donaldos lose. Now, is that a shocker? I don't think so. It's part of an open and obvious and apparent pattern that follows Donald Trump like a twisted and grotesque shadow. That is something that we can ill afford right now, particularly when you consider that the balance of the Supreme Court hangs in dire straits right now with the unfortunate passing of Associate Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia. And that is a point that Texas Senator Ted Cruz has reiterated time and again, but the media only plays partial hype to it. But what we need to remind people like Charles Krauthammer and Bill O'Reilly of is the fact that the media plays a role, a constitutional role, mind you, because if you go back to the Bill of Rights or the first 10 amendments to our shared Constitution, the First Amendment is very important, and it guarantees a free press. Why? The press is supposed to aid the people in vetting the candidates. But how is that accomplished when they are clearly in bed with one candidate, pushing an undeniable agenda that they have been for generations now? How can they accomplish that? Well, they can't. That is why you see social media, popular media, new age media, programs like Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. We are filling the power vacuum. We are filling the gap that has been left due to the dereliction of duty on the part of the salivating mainstream media. And Bill O'Reilly and Charles Krauthammer are being purposefully obtuse with respect to this. But you know, it's not just the so-called mainstream media that's to blame here for the juvenile election cycle that we are all suffering through currently. Today, on the Rush Limbaugh program, Rush stated that, you know, the media is desperate when they compare Trump to Adolf Hitler. Now, yes, I can understand why he would make a claim like that. And I would agree with him if there weren't a modicum of evidence or facts to back this up. However, as Jeremy and I have demonstrated on past episodes of The Wright Flyer, there clearly is something to it. Now, as an attorney, I'm compelled to examine the evidence before advocating a position one way or another. That's just the way that the legal system works. That's the way any one who's trying to get at the truth should be. Because when you stop and think about it, the ultimate objective for a finder of fact, which would be in most court cases, the jury, it's to get at the truth, to mully through the evidence to find and determine the truth. And it's the same thing with respect to the election process. When you stop and consider that the popular sovereigns are the ones who wield the absolute authority in this country in making the determinations with respect to the way and direction that this country should be going, then you can see them as being the finders of facts based on the evidence that is put forth with respect to the candidates. Now, while there is no certain concrete direct evidence to make the Nazi comparison with respect to the Donaldas, circumstantial evidence is still evidence nonetheless. And there certainly is enough circumstantial evidence to make a convincing case. Now, I know that the Trump followers are not going to like this, but listen to me for a moment. I'm not doing this to disparage you, and I'm not even necessarily doing it to disparage your messianic hero, but I am pointing to facts as I see them. So what is this circumstantial evidence of which I speak? Well, for starters, we know back in the 1990s, Ivana Trump, the now ex-wife of Donaldas, said that Trumpus kept a book of Hitler's speeches next to his bed. This was further corroborated by Donaldas during a media interview. I believe it was with Meet the Press back in the 90s, said that yes, there is a certain admiration that he has for Hitler, not necessarily for his policies, but for the way that he could control a crowd. Keep in mind that Donaldus Julius Caesar is at his heart a salesman, and a salesman's goal, quintessential goal, is to ride raw emotionalism to convince the target audience that whatever product they are peddling or service they are peddling will fulfill all their needs. Irrespective of whether that is true or not, that is what the sales pitch is all about. And that is what he does. And by his own admission in The Art of the Deal, he accepts a very hard line position beyond what he knows he can either get or wants to get or desires, and then whittles his way back. It's a form of mediation, but it's not something that is acceptable with respect to principles in leading a country, because our fundamental and unalienable rights are unquestionably non-negotiable. They were endowed to us by our Creator. We do not have the right to hand them away. Now, we can be adjudicated through a natural law process, which is due process, that was handed down to us by God Almighty as well, when we have infringed upon the fundamental and inalienable rights of a fellow citizen. That is what our criminal justice system is all about. But that gets lost when you have a salivating mainstream media that does not believe in a natural law system, and you have an open and obvious hostility towards anything that goes towards our traditions and institutions. And can there be any question that the mainstream media is diametrically opposed to the foundations of this country, the traditions of this country, and the values that were held by our founding fathers, and indeed by those of us who are staunch constitutionalists? Again, folks, I think that the answer is open and obvious. There is no way to avoid pointing out the fact that they are openly hostile to us. Openly hostile. Then, going back to the circumstantial evidence that points out that Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus does have some concerning connections with the views and espousals of Hitler and his allies, particularly Benito Mussolini, remember that Trump defended retweeting a quote by Mussolini, contending that it was a good quote. I'd rather live as a lion than as a sheep, or something to that extent. I don't remember the exact quote offhand, but it was a famous quote by Il Duce. In fact, what's funny is that account was established or set up by Gawker Media to see whether or not they could get Trump to retweet it, and he fell for it hook, line, and sinker. But with respect to the quote itself, we must keep the context of it in mind. Mussolini made the quote as a form of justification for his aggressive invasion of Ethiopia. And it goes back to his entire fascist philosophy of how nations are to dominate one another, and his just bizarre desire to rekindle the power and glory of the Roman Empire. So you see, folks, this is not just some little thing that is drawn up by the media. Therefore, I couldn't disagree more with the assertions that Rush made on his show today, saying that it's desperation on the part of the media. No, where there's smoke, there's fire, and we have seen the smoke bellowing through the Trump campaign time and again. Look at the way that he treats hecklers in his rallies. I know that Jeremy and I have touched on this on past episodes, and therefore it just further illustrates the point here that there is something to this. And so I'm sorry, but I'm going to just have to absolutely disagree with Rush on this contention, because when you look at the mannerisms in which Trump speaks, the way that he conducts himself, the cadence and demeanor of his audience, the way that they get into this mob mentality and attacking people that disagree with them, I'm not saying this as a disparagement. It is a psychological nature of humanity. Humanity can be whipped up into these emotional frenzies, and that is what a sociopath, and folks, I don't think there's any other way to describe Trump and his various mannerisms and conduct than as a sociopath. They thrive and live off of that raw emotionalism. They are masterful manipulators. And that is what Trump has done as the master deal maker. He views the game as an avenue by which to manipulate people. That's what he likes, that's what he enjoys, and that's what he would want to do with our fundamental and inalienable rights. Because if you recall, he has said on numerous past occasions that everything is negotiable. But as Jeremy and I have stated, as our first Air Marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, have stated time and memorial, our fundamental and unalienable rights are non-negotiable. The principles of the Constitution are non-negotiable. Not everything is up for negotiation. Certain things, such as morality and principles, are concrete. But that just doesn't seem to matter with Trump. And that leads me to a question I have with some of the evangelical Christians, and that's really an interesting term. But those that went out in favor of Trump. Do you believe that your faith is negotiable? Is that the message that has been handed down in the good book? I thought there is but one way into heaven. Now, I'm no theologist or theologian, and I'm not going to delve into that. It's just my cursory examination of the facts that leads me to wonder about that. And I'm certainly not casting disparagement towards them. I understand the anger that is brewing deep within the hearts, minds, and souls of the popular sovereigns. The detente wing of the gutless opposition party is to blame for this. There is no other way to put that. In fact, we can't sugarcoat that, folks. They brought this onto themselves. But if it expands to a point where our entire republic is placed in dire jeopardy, then that becomes a whole animal of a different nature. And it's one we cannot just move away from. And it's like I said, where there's smoke, there's fire. Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus is of the type that has bought into the messianic message of his cult of personality. And if you look at Hitler, Hitler did the same thing. And Obama did the same thing. There are comparisons that are on point here, that can be made here. And that is something that I think Rush is missing. Now, the question is whether Rush is missing it on purpose due to a conflict of interest that exists with his, I won't call it close, but his decades-long personal friendship with Donaldus. Perhaps he doesn't want to put it at risk. We know that Donald Trump has a track record of threatening those who say anything against him. Look at the way that he just unraveled when Narco Rube EIEIO went after him and brought up that spy magazine thing of him having stubby small hands. He really does have a Napoleon complex, but it is centered and primarily focused around his hands. Now, what that speaks to is that there is some insecurity with respect to the Donaldus. Perhaps he is feeling very, very insecure about his hands, his conduct, and the way that he tries to just point out and to double down on this notion of that he has beautiful hands. I think that that is a sign that he is insecure with respect to his hands. And therefore, he has to try and come out and make the record straight with it. If that is all it takes to get under his skin, could you imagine what those rogue and tyrannical nations would do? They could push his buttons. That's exactly what they would want to do. They would make no bones about it. They would attack again and again and again, just to get a reaction out of him. You see, folks, it comes down to this notion of Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus as bully. We've all experienced schoolyard bullies. We've all seen what they do. And we all know that the best way to stop a bully is to stand up to them. A bully will be the first to cry, the loudest to cry, because the bully cannot handle what he dishes out, cannot take a substantive dose of his own medicine. And that's what happens when you challenge Donaldus. Irrespective of whether it's done with facts or whether it's getting down into the juvenile mud wrestling that we had with Narco Rube EIEIO for a while. What it shows is that Trump cannot take what he dishes out. And again, when we are looking for someone to be president of the United States, to hold the highest office in the land, to be the undeniable leader of the free world, it is a dangerous proposition that such petty, penultimate concerns dominate him. We need a well-balanced person who understands the Constitution, who wishes to restore strict adherence to that sacred document with the reins of power. Unfortunately, being the master manipulator that he is, Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus has stirred the flames, creating Crew's derangement syndrome. And it is a difficult thing to overcome. And again, pointing back to how Krauthammer tried to say it was the media that dictated it, and then, or not the media, but the candidates that dictated the way the media went, and O'Reilly trying to be an apologist for the media's sensationalist coverage. You see, it ties back to it. The dots are connected. And it shows the agenda of the salivating mainstream media from the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism therefrom are pushing for this narrative. They are just completely enjoying this. It ruffles their feathers and excites them. But I don't find the death spiral of our republic humorous. I fail to find the humorous value in it. And the reason I fail to find such a value in it is because there is none. None to be had, none to be seen. And I know that we have been speaking as to the media's role in all of this. But I want to point out another reason why the media is responsible for the ugliness of the current campaign. And it goes to how you notice how I just mentioned that there is this connection of the dots, that I have just connected the dots for you to see the greater picture with respect to the undeniable agenda of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. Well, the media refuses to connect dots. They purposefully are unwilling to connect the obvious dots. Why? Because it furthers their agenda. And remember that their entire absolute purpose here is to dominate the narrative, to create the narrative, to be the unquestioned masters of the political narrative in this republic. That is not the role that our founding fathers intended for them to assume. It's not the role that they should assume, but that is the role that they have assumed for themselves. Much like how the court gave itself power in that case of Marbury versus Madison back in 1803 of judicial review. Even though no such power is enumerated to the court pursuant to Article 3 of our shared Constitution. That shows the danger that we face in this nation with the way that they conduct themselves, with the views that they put out, with their failures to vet candidates like Barack Hussein Obama. And you know, folks, that's going to be the difference with respect to Obama. Operation Chaos that was devised by Rush that handed us Obama. Obama fit the beliefs of the core party. Trump does not fit the beliefs of the Republican base. There is still a majority of the party who does not support him. But you have people like Narco Rube EIEIO and John the Mushroom Kasich, whose father was a mailman, splitting the vote that would normally coalesce behind a true principled constitutionalist and prolonging this dog and pony show. And I think that that is detrimental to the country as a whole. But again, I lay the blame for this at the feet of the detente wing of the gutless opposition party. This is their monster. This is their Frankenstein-like creation. And it has come home to roost. But it shouldn't affect those of us who never supported the chicanery in the first place. Stop and think about the idea of a tyranny of the majority again. We are a representative republic to avoid that. But neither of the political parties, and certainly not the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, are focusing on it that way, or are looking at it that way. No longer is there a view for the greater good of the country. It has boiled down to a juvenile high school popularity contest. But is that in the best interest of the popular sovereigns? I'm going to go out on a limb here, folks, and say no, that it is not in the best interest of the popular sovereigns. But that doesn't cross the minds of the charlatans and the egomaniacs like Donaldus Julius Caesar Trumpus, or the self-aggrandizers like John the Mushroom Kasich, whose father was a mailman, or Narco Rube EIEIO, dubious Marxists there. And when I look back at the reason that the media refuses to connect the dots, case in point, we see that a Rubio spokeswoman appeared on the Fox News channels Happening Now today and claimed that CNN's report yesterday about there being several Rubio advisors who spoke only on the condition of anonymity, stating that he should drop out before Florida to avoid being crushed, to save face. And this all ties around the fact that Florida is a winner-take-all primary. Well, this spokeswoman came out and denied it and denied it and denied it until she was blue in the face, as if that would somehow convince us that the evidence of Rubio's poor performance in this presidential contest thus far is not there. He's won what? He's won Minnesota and Puerto Rico. And it's beyond me, folks, why Puerto Rico has a say in this. I'm not trying to disparage the Puerto Rican people, but I just think that that's an odd position to have. We in this country must be responsible for its future. And we have to understand that politics is adversarial by nature. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to take this opportunity to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. Also, I invite you to leave questions, comments, or concerns either here on our YouTube page or on our Facebook page or our Google Plus page. And I also invite you to follow us on Twitter with the Twitter handle of @RadioAviationEX or Radio Aviation X. That's all one word, folks. Once again, that's @RadioAviationEX, @RadioAviationEX. And visit our Cafe Press site, which you can find on our Twitter profile on the departure board. Go ahead and take a look at some of our products. I think there's some stuff there you like. Give us a little help here for bringing you this true, pure, indelible sense of enlightenment. And join us again next time as we take off over the friendly airwaves. And we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you for flying the Wright Flyer, folks. See you next time.